If you stepped out of a time machine into a 14th century market square, you wouldn't just be a stranger, you would be a sociopath. We live in an era of detachment. We play it cool. We value chill. But to a medieval woman, your calm demeanor wouldn't read as confidence. It would read as a soulless void. The historian Johann Huizinga described the late Middle Ages as a time of violent, unhinged emotion. We are talking about grown men collapsing in tears during a sermon, entire villages weeping in mass hysteria for days, and people rushing to physically touch a priest as if he were a rock star. In that atmosphere, feeling nothing was more frightening than feeling too much. In this world, your modern stoicism is suspicious. If you aren't weeping at the sight of the Eucharist or screaming your devotion to a saint, what are you hiding? Are you a heretic? A demon? To the medieval mind, silence wasn't golden. It was empty. They lived life at volume 10, oscillating between ecstatic joy and crushing despair. A woman from this era wouldn't just find you boring, she would find you terrifyingly hollow. A husk of a human being who feels nothing in a world that demands you feel everything. To her, your emotional restraint would look less like maturity and more like a spiritual sickness. But if you think the general public was intense, wait until you meet the women who dedicated their lives to God. They make your modern spirituality look like a joke. Let's talk about Marjorie Kempe. To modern eyes, she looks like a candidate for a psychiatric ward. She would fall to the ground, thrashing and roaring, sobbing uncontrollably at the mere mention of Jesus. She saw demons attacking her physically. She heard the voice of God drowning out the world. And she wasn't alone. This was the era of the mystic, where women like Joan of Arc rose from peasantry to lead armies based on voices in their heads. To her contemporaries, that total surrender to spiritual vision was terrifying and holy at the same time. Religion wasn't a Sunday obligation. It was a physical contact sport. Catholicism was the great equalizer, the only ladder a woman could climb in a world designed to keep her down. A medieval woman's piety was her power. If you, a modern man, walked in with your casual skepticism or your spiritual but not religious attitude, you wouldn't just be undateable, you would be a social pariah. You would be seen as a spiritual contagion, a man who lacks the fire to save his own soul, let alone lead a household. Your refusal to burn with devotion would brand you as weak, unreliable, and probably damned. And this intensity didn't stop at the church door. If you wanted to date a medieval woman, you had better be ready to bleed for it literally. Forget playing hard to get. In the 14th century, if you weren't willing to publicly humiliate yourself for love, you weren't trying. The modern cool guy act, it is a death sentence for romance here. A noblewoman expected a performance. She wanted poetry written in blood, metaphorically, and sometimes literally. She wanted you to pine, to starve, to declare that her beauty was killing you. This wasn't considered desperate. It was the bare minimum requirement for entry. A man who didn't suffer visibly for love simply wasn't worth noticing. We call it love bombing today and flag it as toxic behavior. They called it courtly love. It was a radical rejection of the mundane. In a world where death was always around the corner, thanks to the plague and constant war, love had to be transcendent. If you approached a medieval lady with a casual, "Hey, want to grab some mead?" she would look at you like you had just insulted her ancestors. You need to be Lancelot, willing to ride in a criminal's cart and lose your honor just to catch a glimpse of her shadow. Your devotion had to be theatrical enough that bards could sing about it for generations. But was this actually what women wanted? Or was it just a game men played with each other? The answer lies with a woman who decided to pick up a pen and fight back. Enter Christine de Pizan, the woman who stood on business 600 years before the internet. She was the first woman in Europe to make a living by writing, and she used her platform to go to war against the incels of her day. A popular poem, Roman de la Rose, was making the rounds, describing women as lying, sex-crazed manipulators who needed to be conquered. Christine wasn't having it. She publicly slammed the poem, demanding that women be treated with reverence and respect, not as objects of lust. In a culture that barely tolerated female literacy, that level of pushback was revolutionary. This proves that the desire for high-minded, respectful love wasn't just a male fantasy, it was a female demand. Women were tired of being slandered. They wanted the chivalry that was promised to them. They wanted a love that was pure, selfless, and intense. If you came to them with the modern cynicism that says, romance is dead, you would be proving the misogynists right. You would be the enemy. A man who refused to honor women in word and deed would instantly expose himself as part of the problem Christine was writing against. So, you have to perform. But the performance of chivalry wasn't just about writing poems. It was about ritual submission that would make a modern man's skin crawl. Chivalry was a trap, but it was a trap men willingly walked into. To prove your worth, you had to submit. The greatest knights in literature and history proved their love by debasing themselves. It mirrored their religion. Just as you submit to God, you submit to your lady. She becomes a deity, and you are the worshipper. It is a complete inversion of the patriarchal society they lived in, a fantasy space where the woman holds the whip hand. To win her favor, you had to accept that your pride would be the first casualty. For a modern man who values equality and partnership, this dynamic is baffling. You want a partner, she wants a devotee. You want to split the bill, she wants you to conquer a kingdom in her name. The cultural gap is a canyon. You are playing checkers, while she is playing a high-stakes game of emotional chess, where the pawns are your dignity. In her world, your readiness to kneel is the clearest proof you can be trusted to stand for her when it matters. But let's step out of the castle. Did the peasant woman in the mud care about this poetic nonsense? Or was her life too brutal for romance? We often assume the poor were just trying to survive, but history shows they were watching the rich with a mix of awe and murderous envy. The lower classes mimicked the nobility whenever they could. A merchant's wife would demand the same respect and the same expensive fabrics as a duchess, leading to laws explicitly forbidding her from dressing too delightfully. Fashion became a battlefield where class anxiety and aspiration clashed on every hemline. But beneath the imitation lay a simmering rage. The Jacquerie Revolt of 1358 showed what happens when the pressure cooker explodes. Peasants didn't just kill their lords, they obliterated them. This duality, admiration, and hatred defined the common woman's view of the world. If you walked into her village with your modern wealth and soft hands, you wouldn't be a curiosity, you would be a target. You represent the excess they crave and despise simultaneously. To her, you are proof that the world is still unfair, just dressed in different clothes and holding a smartphone. And if you think you could charm your way out of it with your modern morality, think again. Your moral compass is broken in their eyes. Here is the hard truth. To a medieval woman, you are a degenerate. You use profanity casually? Sin. You look at sexual imagery? Mortal sin. You skip church? Heresy. You don't lead your household in prayer? Dereliction of duty. In the medieval mind, the man is the priest of the family. If you fail to uphold the moral standard, you aren't just hurting yourself, you are damning your wife and children to eternal hellfire. Your casual vices would look like calculated attempts to drag everyone around you into spiritual ruin. They took this literally. Preachers thundered from the pulpit that a man's sexual immorality brought rot into his home. A woman relied on her husband to be her spiritual shield. If you are the chill, open-minded modern guy who thinks everything is relative, you are terrifying to her. You are a captain who refuses to steer the ship in a storm. She doesn't want your open-mindedness, she wants your conviction. In her world, certainty is safety, and your ambiguity is a threat. But wait, were they really this pious? Or was it all a performance? The answer is a frustrating human yes and no. Humans have always been walking contradictions. Anne of Burgundy could wash the feet of the sick in a hospital one day and then ride her horse through a crowd of monks the next, splashing them with mud because they were in her way. They lived in a state of cognitive dissonance, balancing extreme piety with extreme arrogance. They were messy, loud, violent, and devout all at once. The same hands that clutched rosaries could pull swords, sign death warrants, or slap a servant without a second thought. And that is why you couldn't handle them. We are too ironic, too detached, too afraid of being cringe. Medieval women lived with their hearts ripped open. They loved harder, hated fiercer, and prayed louder than we can imagine. They would look at our sanitized, safe, cynical lives and pity us. To them, our carefully curated calm would look like a life half lived, a soul that never dared to burn. So, could you date a medieval woman? Absolutely not. She would eat you alive. But maybe, just maybe, we should envy the fire that burned in her veins, because at least she felt something real. If you enjoyed this dive into the dark past, subscribe for more historical reality checks.